Influential American business magazine Forbes suggests that Latin American countries, particularly Brazil, Peru, Argentina and Venezuela, are poised to be strong economic players in the new year. John Terrett has our report.
Forget China, Latin America is the place to be if you want strong returns in 2011 and beyond. Economists feel that while Asia is still a major engine of global growth in these recessionary times, China's interest rates have spiked twice in the past 3 months to calm inflation, and that's a move that risks tapping the brakes on its own impressive growth. Therefore, the argument goes, things are swinging the way of Latin America, where tame inflation and growing economic demand make Brazil, Peru, Argentina and Venezuela countries to watch. Number crunchers at the Bank of America Merrill Lynch put it this way: accelerating capital inflows, stronger domestic demand and minor risk of inflation mean Latin America could move to the fore in 2011. With Brazil swearing in its new president, Dilma Rousseff, this weekend, economists are looking for her to step out of the shadow of her predecessor and maintain his pro-growth, state interventionist economic models. Presidential elections in Peru are looming in April. Many candidates support the open, competitive economic model and ending corrupt and inefficient state practices. One worry, though, with annual economic growth of around 8%, there may be a reluctance to rock the boat too much while things are soaring. Argentina will be holding presidential elections in October. In the meantime, high demand from Asia and technological developments mean the country's economy has proved resilient in the face of expropriations, high taxation and political interference. In Venezuela, it's all eyes on Hugo Chavez's attempts to clip the wings of the new National Assembly with its sizable opposition bloc, which will be seated in January. Annualized economic growth in Latin American countries has been averaging between 4 and 5%, above that of the United States and Europe. Debt is under control, the banks are well funded, and trading between neighbouring nations is currently flourishing. It's true that more work needs to be done to conquer poverty, but the consensus among economists seems to be that going into 2011, Latin American countries are set fair to fight back after the global recession of 2008. John Terrett, Al Jazeera, at the World Bank in Washington, D.C.
Joining us now to discuss this is Juan Carlos Hidalgo. He's the Latin America Project Coordinator at the Cato Institute here in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, when we look at the Latin American economy, and this is broadly speaking, it looks very positive, doesn't it? I mean, we've got Peru, 6% growth, as we heard in that report there, 8% across the continent. We have other countries like Chile, which is showing 6% as well. Is this reason enough to be optimistic?
There is reason enough to be optimistic indeed. I think that the much criticized Washington Consensus of the 1990s, when many of these countries implemented reforms, some of them have reforms. They didn't implement the full package, but they introduced sound macroeconomic policies like stable budgets. They lower inflation. They open up their economies to world trade. Those reforms have provided the basis for these boom years that we are experiencing right now. Of course, high demand for raw materials from China and India has also played a part, especially in countries such as Brazil and Argentina. But I think that there are reasons to be optimistic about these 6 years, 7 years that the Latin American economies have been growing at a fast pace.
Well, you are right there. I mean, many of the economies in Latin America did change at the behest of Washington, moving to more free market economies. But what about the other side of that coin? How much have we seen any reduction in social expenditure, for instance?
No, actually, there is some concern in some quarters that the boom years, the revenue that these governments in Argentina, in Brazil, in Bolivia, and other countries are using this increased revenue in order to fund social policies. Some of these social policies have good effects. The problem is that they rely heavily on the income, the revenue caused by the export of raw materials. If demand from China and India declines and the demand for these raw material declines, these countries, these governments might find in a tough spot, because then their compromises to the population will remain the same while the revenues will drop.
Right. The other thing is that in many of these free market economies, we've seen a shift of wealth from one side to the other. It goes, the rich get richer, as we say. What is the employment picture looking like in Latin America?
Jobs have been created. The problem is with the unemployment figure is that it's not a reliable figure in order to measure up Latin America. Let's remember that Latin America is one of the regions with the highest rate of informal economy. So you have countries like Mexico with a 4% unemployment rate in recent years, but almost half of the people work in the informal sector. So I don't think that looking at the employment rate is a good criteria in order to measure up the Latin American economy.
Okay, very quickly, we just have a few seconds. Is there a gap that is growing between those who have and those who have not, broadly speaking, across the continent?
I think there is a gap growing between countries, not within countries. You see the countries in the Pacific Rim of Latin America, Peru, Chile, Colombia, implementing free market reforms, growing fast and having some basis for growth. Whereas other countries like Argentina, Venezuela, and Bolivia, and you might even say Brazil, their growth mostly depend on raw material exports.
All right, sir. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.